Hello, everyone. Welcome to another virtual event with Mysterious Galaxy. I am Nick, the Director of Events for the store. Today, we are here with two wonderful authors, Ethan Chatagnier and Erika Swyler. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
We are celebrating the recent release of Ethan's Singer Distance. Hope everyone out there in video land has their copies. Ethan is the author most recently of this one here, which released October 18th, The Singer Distance, and he has also published the short story collection Warnings from the Future. His stories have appeared in Kenyon Review Online, Georgia Review, New England Review, and other journals, and have been awarded a Pushcart Prize and listed as notable in the Best American Short Stories. In conversation, of course, we have Erika Swyler, the best-selling author of the critically acclaimed novels Light from Other Stars and the Book of Speculation. Her essays and short fiction have appeared in CATAPULT, Literary Hub, VIDA, and New York Times, and elsewhere. If you haven't yet purchased your copy of Singer Distance, what are you waiting for? Do it now. You're going to hear Erika very shortly sing its praises, but until then, you can order it through Mysterious Galaxy still and get a signed book plate that we have from Ethan, and we'll ship those across the country as well as outside of the country. Not everywhere, unfortunately, weird shipping things going on in the last 2 years. Or you can pick it up in store. We, of course, also in the same link below have links to Erika's books if you want to go ahead and give some love all around to these wonderful authors. And lastly, if you have any questions you would like to ask during the event, you'll notice there's another link below that says Ask a Question. You might be asking yourself, what is this question? I'll answer your question. Sorry, being silly. You can submit any of your questions you would like to ask Ethan later in the event, and we will pull those and answer them hopefully at the end. All right, I'm going to go disappear for now and leave it to these two wonderful people to go ahead and take it away. I'll see everyone later.
Thank you. Thank you to Mysterious Galaxy for hosting this. And thank you, Ethan, for writing this wonderful book, which I have not flipped, but I want to start and describe a little bit of this amazing Singer Distance. It is an alternate history involving contact with Mars. The conceit is that Mars has reached out and we have reached back, and now they're not talking to us anymore. And from there, it kind of unfolds into this weird, wonderful scientific puzzle, and then a mystery. So I have a lot of questions. I will say, first of all, that this book completely bowled me over. I stopped and cried about math, about Mars, about the difficulty of loving geniuses. So there's so much. It's just a dense and beautiful and very human book. And I am so thrilled to get to be able to talk to you about it. Starting off very quickly and easily, how do you define this book? I've seen you say that it's like speculative fiction, literary, sci-fi. How do you classify it?
I'm historically more of a literary writer, and I think of it mostly in those terms. But I'm kind of a premise-driven writer, so when I come to an idea, I feel like I let that idea lead the way and try and find its best expression. And so I love like a high concept premise where you can explore the world in some way through an alternate reality or a near future or something like that. So I mean, I think it's really on that line between sci-fi and literary fiction, but maybe leaning a little bit toward the literary side.
I may have been reading up on you and hearing that your favorite book was Never Let Me Go. And
Yes.
I feel that sort of treads a similar line. I personally would call it sci-fi, but the style that it's written in is incredibly literary. And I think you're hitting on that same sort of thing. Forgive me, I'm going to have to take one earbud out because I'm hearing myself talk way too much.
I think. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. So how do you see those lines defined for yourself?
Yeah, I kind of answered in a sci-fi versus literary sort of way, where it's like a sliding scale. But I think that that's too simple, and I feel like the
Mhm.
best way I can conceive of different genres is like color mixing, where you can go in multiple directions on a color grid, and you can add in more blue and add in more red. And you don't have to take out some red to add in more blue. You can kind of up each as much as you want.
Excellent. I love that because you're bringing in science and genre and art, which is very much what happens in this book in an interesting way. So, I want to talk a little about your main characters. We've got Rick and Crystal Singer is a incredibly brilliant mathematician who has figured out or believes she's figured out how to communicate with Mars after their long silence. Crystal really stuck with me as a character because you see so few female geniuses written. Um, so few determined female geniuses. And it's very rare that you see that narrated from a male perspective. So, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about their dynamic.
Yeah, well, thinking about the characters as I was starting to feel them and the scenario out, I kind of felt like if I had a male genius who had, figured out the hardest math problem in the solar system, and a woman who was there kind of running support for him, that it would feel stodgy and outdated and feel like it was following a lot of already trod patterns. And so I just thought it was a lot more compelling to have it switched and to have the narrator, who's the boyfriend, be the one who like sees that Crystal is a genius and wants to like organize everything and plan everything and make everything happen and just support her. And I felt like that helped me feel out Rick, the narrator, a lot too, because he's got this way of talking about that where he tries to be very humble about uh, about how he doesn't get the curious language, but he's just there to plan everything and make everything happen. But he's also very proud of how humble he is about that. So it gave me something to play with a little there as kind of a complicated characteristic for him.
I enjoy Rick so much for that because it's clear there's a group of 5 that's going to attempt to contact Mars again. And among the group of 5, Rick seems most aware of his own limitations, which I think becomes such a key focus of the novel. Like, where does your limit of learning hit? And Rick is very aware of his. Crystal, maybe not so much. And so watching that dynamic is really interesting. I want to talk to you very specifically about how we are in contact with Mars. You've invented a language and you've invented a kind of math. So this is where we get into the speculative elements, but it's also, I think, what in some ways makes this almost a hard sci-fi, because you've created rules, you've invented a thing, and this book does not work without it. You always obey the rules of this language. So I find that fascinating. Would you describe what the Martian language is for us? Because I have a very clear picture in my mind of what it looks like, and it's beautiful. So where did you get that from?
I got the initial idea, the Earth's attempt to signal Mars, and this is in the early 1900s. So we didn't have like serious radio technology, like we didn't have radio astronomy or anything like that at that point. So to signal Mars, we have in the book these huge carvings into the earth where they fill them up with petroleum and light them on fire to send a signal to Mars that's big enough to see through, like, presumably a telescope, which is something I basically picked up on and used from one of the inspirations for the book, which is a Ken Kalfus novel called Equilateral, where it has an astronomer doing something very similar to that. And that book isn't, in that book, there's no one on Mars to answer. And it's more about kind of the life on Earth. But I wanted to make the Martian language more elegant than that, their way of writing, because the idea of like carving into the earth and burning it seems very like crudely human, and I wanted something for Mars to be more advanced and kind of beautiful. And so it's this glowing blue writing, and it's not completely clear how they make it, but when the astronomers look through the telescope, they can see like the symbols carving themselves, not carving, but like drawing themselves out in this glowing blue writing.
It's incredibly gorgeous, and I felt myself wanting to doodle it. And again, when you get this book, when you read it, doodle alongside, because you get this idea about what the language looks like, and it's very visual and incredibly rich. And it's one of those things I was texting other people about, like, please read this. Like, what does this look like to you? I need to know. So it's this beautiful thing. But you also have the challenge of explaining math that doesn't exist. And this is where I picked up on, you're a father, are you not?
Yes, I am.
I kind of got the wonderful sense of how you would explain an incredibly difficult concept to a child. Something like randomly explaining to a 5-year-old how cell phones work. Yeah. It's just not there yet. And in Crystal trying to explain things to Rick to bridge that gap in their understanding, I really felt like that was there. Is that something you've had to do with your kids?
Yeah, I can think of an example right offhand where, we have an iPad that will sometimes let the kids watch a movie on if we're going on a long drive. And when they were younger, they didn't really understand, like, okay, how come I can watch any movie from home, but only at like 1 or 2 choices on the road? And so I was trying to explain it to them with, like, okay, think of the water faucet in your house where you can turn on water and get as much as you want. That's like the internet we have at home. And when you're on the drive, it's like you have a cup, so you can fill up the cup with a certain amount of water and take it with you. I don't know if that stuck well or anything, but I found as I was writing the book, and having Crystal try and explain the math to the other people in the group, and having Lucas Holiday, who's kind of a Carl Sagan-like character, try to explain the math or explain various types of math to people. They have this love of the teaching analogy that I love too, where it's like, you can't understand something, you're looking at like the specifics and the details of it, but then if you can find the right framework to think about, everything can click into place, which I love that. And I love the successful teaching analogies, but I also love kind of like that feeling when you're teaching someone something of like groping for the right analogy and maybe trying a few out and working your way toward that thing that makes it click.
I think one of the wonder moments in this book is Rick trying to explain space-time to Rhea, and I will not say who Rhea is, but and just failing miserably. It's the most human thing. It's very clear to him, and this is the best analogy that he can get, and she's just like, no, try again later, you're doing it wrong. And it's so deeply human. I loved it so much. I do want to talk about Lucas Halliday, because as a fellow lover of Sagan, he was sort of immediately recognizable to me in those terms. But of course, you take him left. Do you want to talk a little bit about him?
Yeah, actually, there's a little nod in there when he's first described. It talks about him wearing a weird outfit, like a tan blazer with a green turtleneck.
And his hair is done just so. Yeah.
And if you search like Carl Sagan images, you will find that picture of him in that outfit. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I came to Sagan later than a lot of people. Like we didn't have cable for the reruns or anything when I was a kid, so I didn't catch like reruns of Cosmos growing up or anything. So I came to that later, came to some of his books and you know, speeches and points later on. But he has that magic of connecting the hard sciences, which he was, you know, very talented in, to the very human and to like poetic qualities and heroic traits. And so he feels like he's the guy who could bring the magic of space into the living room and into like, you know, not just into like a lecture hall, but into everyone's house in ways that they could understand it. And so there's just so much wonder in that. I feel like he's the guy who made the U.S. or, you know, the U.S. and beyond fall in love with space, which is pretty cool.
I did get him very young. So one of the first voices in my brain is Carl Sagan going billions and billions of stars. So it just kind of stuck with me. And I recognized that figure right away and the great affection for the wonder that science communicators instill. And gosh, I wish there were more today.
Yeah.
I think the folks doing it now seem to be like Bill Nye and Alan Alda of all people, which is kind of wonderful. So this book is divided into 3 parts or 3 acts, very nice structure. And essentially I'll call it 3.5 road trips. You have done the thing that I envy. You wrote a road trip. I've never been able to do it successfully. Why a road trip? And so much of it on Route 66. What about it?
I think it's a lot about movement and kind of forward momentum in a lot of ways, at least for the first section where they are setting out on the quest to make their own attempt to signal Mars. I wanted that feeling of like rushing somewhere on kind of a secret mission or that sense of a quest to accomplish something. And so it felt like, okay, we've got to meet them on the road on the way they are speeding down the freeway. And then the second section is kind of the momentum has to change because they've reached their destination. They've completed their test that they were trying out. And instead of having this incredible momentum in one direction, things have to stop. And especially for Rick, kind of slow down. He has to lose all that momentum for the book to, I think, go in an interesting direction and kind of deepen the themes a little bit that are beyond just getting to the quest and completing it. Mm-hmm. And then once his life has kind of come to a standstill, then to take it in an interesting direction, he needs to try to find his own momentum again. And some things help push him along the way. But it's kind of that feeling of like, okay, getting all this direction, losing all the direction, and then finding the way back to the direction again. In regards to Route 66, there's kind of a surface level reason why I wanted to be on Route 66 is because it's set mostly in 1960 and up through the early 1970s, and that, you know, with the interstate system was still being built then, and that's kind of like the main way you would go. You might have some other choices to take on it, but it's this end, kind of the end of the era of Route 66 and the start of the modern highway system. And so it felt like it tied into that nostalgia, it tied into the beginnings of the space age. But there's also kind of a more secret reason why, which was you've got Route 66 and parts of it are still around and parts of it are paved over by I-40. And the kind of the big question, the thing that everyone can't grasp about the Martian math and the latest equation Crystal's trying to solve, is that it says what seemingly mutually exclusive things about distance, like a distance between two people or a distance across the country can be two different things. It seems like the Martian math says something can be near and far at the same time. And so I-40 and Route 66 are two pretty close to identical highways. They have the same start point and the same end point, but Route 66 and I-40 are two different distances. Route 66 is a more kind of old squiggly highway, and I-40 is more of a like straight across modern highway. So I liked connecting that, and I would plan to, like, when I was writing it, I planned to like loop that in to the third act and connect that into the themes, but I thought it would get a little too obvious to include it. But now everyone watching can know that was kind of the background of the idea.
You would have made me cry over a road. That's what's happening. But that's fascinating. I actually do want to talk about time and distance specifically with this book in the way that you use letters. Because again, we're talking nostalgia. There is no real internet happening yet. So at a point, Rick and Crystal split off from each other, and Rick begins writing letters every week, and Crystal writes less frequently. And he's thinking about the exact moment that she will be reading this, as he's already writing another letter, and he is both there and where he is, and in a different time. And in an odd way, you've explained your Martian math, but, indirectly through metaphor, which is lovely. But there are all these letters in this book. What was it like for you to be writing an epistolary novel?
Yeah, I had thought that part 2 might be completely epistolary, and I wasn't sure when I got there if I can make that work. But I wanted it to be kind of letter heavy for a couple of reasons. Letter writing is a lot about distance and trying to cross a great distance. For a long time you couldn't phone anyone, you couldn't connect with anyone except by the post, which took a long time. And there were a couple kind of space and math related things I wanted it to connect it to. So like when you have I know you know this well, but when you have a spaceship out there, the more distant it gets from Earth, the longer it takes for communication to get there and back. So, if you're a little ways out, I don't remember the exact time. I think it takes like 7 or 8 minutes for communication we send from Earth to reach Mars or something near Mars, and a lot longer if you get deeper into the solar system. And that felt kind of like that letter writing. When you get messages on a spaceship that's far out there, you get the message delivered like a voicemail. You send a message back that gets delivered like a voicemail. So I liked the connection to that, and I liked the connection. At one point, Rick's talking, one of the first letters Rick sends, he's saying that he's sending this letter now, and right after he dropped her off at the airport, but she wouldn't receive it until she landed on the West Coast. And it kind of felt a little like in like quantum mechanics, how you can not know the superposition of a particle until you check where it's going to be. And so I like that sense of like encapsulated information that's coded into something, but can only be received later on.
You gave, in some ways, a very clear example through people of very difficult to explain science. So that was really tangible for me, and I enjoyed that a lot. You've also done something plot-wise that is my favorite plot device, which is the unforgivable act. And this is why you need to read this book. Oh my gosh. Because I can't talk about it without spoiling it, and without completely giving away your third act. But Did you know from the beginning that you were going to have Crystal commit an unforgivable act? I don't think that's spoiling.
No, I don't
And
think so.
yeah, did you know from the beginning?
I didn't know from the very beginning. I feel like by the time I was about halfway through that section, that's when I started to think like, okay, well, what's going to happen as a turn to shake things up, and where does it feel like things want to go after this? And that's when I started to think, okay, here's this bad thing that's going to happen, and I started to think about it, what are some of the reasons why that might happen, and it helped develop Crystal as something more than just the genius who solved the equation,
Right.
and kind of go deeper into other aspects of her character, which aren't always perfect, but I think are maybe understandable, but I think they're kind of debatable, and people would vary on whether they think it's completely unforgivable or forgivable under the right circumstances, but definitely not something that's good.
That's the first thing that came up in the group chat. I was like, oh my gosh, how do you react to this? So it's a good, real plot generator. And it also, I felt, added a whole new dimension to Rick, who early on, because he's being so intentionally humble and such a Crystal supporter, could almost be in danger of being like a wife guy.
Yeah.
Not to use common terms, but you've thrown this thing at him that gives him, in some ways, such incredible depth. I was, blown away by that choice. And after you chose that, did you go back to the beginning and start writing drops? Because I've been lucky enough to read this multiple times now, and it's seamless. First time through, I don't get what you're doing as far as these little drops, but second time, I'm like, oh, you master.
Well, thank you. I did go back and seed a couple things in. I think I had some stuff that was in there that once I figured out where things were going to go as you get into the later parts of the novel, I found some things that had already happened that I could connect in to kind of the twist there. But yeah, I thought, okay, I need to probably add in maybe 2 more hints, or just things that connect. And I was going for that exact thing that you mentioned, where it's always a pleasure to read, where you something happens and you're like, oh, this connects to that and that. It's like a pleasure as a reader. So I was hoping to set that up.
It was so satisfying. I have questions for you as a writer of literary sci-fi, as I'm going to call it. I have to ask the obligatory, what is your science background? Do you have one? All of that.
I get to perform a little of Rick's humility on this because I don't really have a science background. I was a good math student in middle school and high school, and in college I took as few math classes as I could. I had some science classes that I really loved, and that's where I sort of started to get a vague and very imperfect understanding of relativity and quantum mechanics that relies on a lot of that, those teaching analogies where they're like, picture it like this, and it's like, okay, I can imagine that at least.
Right.
And no, I mean, I've got to love it, and I was really drawn to those aspects of science and physics that seem almost mystical because they are like fundamentally at odds with the way we perceive the universe. And I think we can all perceive the universe very easily in the Newtonian form of mathematics, where like you shoot a cannonball and you can, based on how hard you shoot it and the angle you shoot it, you can know where it's going to go and land. And then you get to like relativity in Einstein's two theories of relativity in the early 20th century, and it's like, okay, time and distance are connected and they don't work at all. Like you can bend both. And it's like, okay, you can only understand that by analogy, I think. And with quantum mechanics, it's the same thing. It's like here's in very small, like subatomic levels, things just work differently in this weird way that's also very hard to understand. And I feel like there's always a temptation to disbelieve both those things because we just can't see things at that level, and it just doesn't grok with our way of seeing things work in the world. And so it feels a little like magic, I think, and that's pretty fun.
I definitely got that sense from this book that you're living in that weirdness in some way, but also in a very human sense. Everyone in the book is trying to understand this. Part of what I love so much about it is a passage where you say people are carving Martian writing onto like their roofs and their lawns. Just everybody wants to participate and communicate. And that felt very inclusive and human, and in a way that was exciting, like, for them, like the moon landing, pre-moon landing, which does happen. So, I appreciated that very much. I also have to ask, what kind of research did you do? This is the question everyone loves and hates.
Yeah. My usual method is to do a fair amount of like just ad hoc research as I need it for the scene. So probably 80% of the research I did was not like reading volumes and volumes of different books before, but figuring out, okay, what do I need for this scene? I struggle a lot with the van because I wanted the characters while they go on their first road trip to be in like a blue Chevy, like hippie van.
But that wasn't there.
And that's the vibe I wanted, but those didn't exist until the mid 60s. So I had to shift it to like an old newspaper delivery van, which wasn't nearly as big. And so a lot of it was related to making sure things fit the time period as well as I could, which I think helped enrich the setting. And what else? I watched some documentaries and stuff. I find that documentaries and podcasts are really useful because you get to hear the experts who really, you get to learn about the science, but you also get to hear the way people who actually understand it, unlike me, the way they talk about it, which is really good for getting that flavor and making the characters who understand it seem believable, because you can kind of sprinkle in a few actual like facts and details, but it just takes a couple if you're mixing that with the voice of how people talk about it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I could ask you a million questions, but I want to make sure I get to other people's before I continue to talk your ear off. So let's see. Oh, we've got one from Jen Phillips. Hi, Jen. Jen is fantastic, an amazing writer in her own right. She would like to know, did you have a section that you most loved writing or a section that you love reading?
I've got a couple that stand out. I'm very proud of the section near the end at the beach. And I can't say too much about it because it's tied in with a couple of things that don't get revealed until later. But it's kind of where something big in the novel has just been completed, an attempt at something. And the characters don't know whether it worked. And I feel like there's kind of a desire to like rush ahead into what comes at the very end. But I felt like it was really important. And I didn't realize this at first, but I came to think it was really important to slow things down. And I feel like that was a scene as a younger writer or less experienced writer, I wouldn't have known to put that scene there. But from my perspective now, it feels like a really important and centering moment for the end of the book. And then the other part that was most fun to write, and I think one of the most fun to read, is the first introduction to Lucas Holiday, where it's talking about how he taught his students in the classroom, and how he started his radio career and was kind of a science communicator on the radio. And like we said before, it really let me just to get to inhabit Carl Sagan and play around as him, which is really fun.
That sounds like a blast.
You should try
just
it.
playing with Sagan would be fun. So we've got another one here from Talia Kaluri. I hope I'm saying your last name right. Sorry if I'm not. Crystal and Rick seem very complementary in terms of personality. How did you develop their characters? Did you develop them simultaneously, or did one character help you write the other?
I think they kind of reinforced and developed each other as we went. I had Crystal first, like a sense of who she was. I needed her to be a genius, but I also wanted her to be down to earth. If kind of spacey is not the right way, but very imaginative. I wanted her to have a kind of a hippie vibe, kind of be a little bit not of this world, or just kind of her own, very much her own person, and not a tortured genius in the sense that she didn't like know how to talk to people,
right,
or didn't have any social skills. I wanted to go the other direction, where she had kind of a very, both a very sharp mathematical mind, but also a very poetic sort of mind too. And then I needed Rick to be kind of a foil for her, where he's very down to earth. He knows he's not like competing with her. I knew I needed someone who was going to feel like he couldn't really keep up with her. I feel like one of the core aspects of the book is this feeling like you're chasing someone, and feeling like you can't measure up to someone. Like Earth can't measure up to Mars's mathematics, and Rick feels like he can't measure up to Crystal. And so that from there, I was able to kind of develop Rick's humble, maybe too humble personality.
And this plays off that. This question is from Andy Rowe. The character of Crystal is one of Singer Distance's many marvels. Yes, it's marvelous. So compelling and yet so mysterious and ultimately unknown. Can you talk about the challenges of writing such a character and finding that balance of keeping her mysterious, elusive, but not so opaque that the reader doesn't get a strong sense of who she is?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. And that's a good question. There were some challenges to writing Crystal, because it is hard to write a genius. There are a lot of pitfalls. There are a lot of like TV geniuses where there are some tropes or some problems, and a lot of times you do see those genius characters where the whole thing is they are a genius, but they don't know how to connect to anybody. That's Sherlock Holmes, that's House from the TV show House, and many other characters like that. And I felt like that was something I really wanted to avoid, and I wanted to give her a personality that people would love too. I wanted people to see why Rick feels so intensely in love with her, and so I wanted her to have these kind of ideas that branched in many directions, and have that sense of wonder about all sorts of things in the universe and in the world, not just math. But it was also, it was those challenges in the writing that felt productive, that felt good to say, like, okay, what are the ways I want to avoid going with this? And then what are the paths remaining that are more interesting?
I think something that really solidified their connection and also increased Crystal's three-dimensionality for me was there are some father issues in this book for both Rick and for Crystal in very different ways. In some ways, Rick is sort of like Crystal for his father, and Crystal has a very different relationship with her father. Do you want to talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to. Rick's issues with his dad show up. They peek their head up a little bit in part 1, but they come up as more of a core element in section 2. And in section 2, I wanted to, as the momentum of the quest died down, I wanted to dive deeper into the theme, and I wanted it to be, a lot of the story is about Rick and Crystal's emotional distance from one another and how that changes over time. But I wanted to deepen that theme a little bit by tying in other forms of emotional distance, and that's very common with parents to their children and children with their parents, for those things to change over time and develop and swing one way and another, and so that was kind of the priority in part 2, was saying, like, okay, what is Rick's emotional distance from his dad like? How did that change over time? And with his mom too, his relationship with his mom is better, but there are also some questions about their emotional distance, and same thing with Crystal. I don't think there's that wasn't connected into that same part as much, but I wanted her and her father to be alike in certain ways, and sometimes that can also breed a kind of distance, even like as you're butting heads. That's kind of a way of being close and kind of a way of being distant at the same time.
Crystal's father has a particular line that just sticks with me. He tells Rick she's going to need someone to take out the trash. And it's incredibly true, because she can't really keep everything together all the time. And Rick is very good at logistics, and that's how he sees himself and he's presented himself. But it also sets up that her father has been, in some ways, taking out the trash for her and is sort of just becoming aware of it, it was a lovely, lovely moment. And I thought it was just very nicely done. And it also touches on this thing that you do throughout your road trips, which is you revisit places. Pretty much everywhere in the novel you touch back to. But you're in a different place and time. So you're actually doing the Martian math with your structure, which is interesting. And each time we go back, the place is different and Rick is different, and it's just beautifully done. So I want to congratulate you on that. We have a question from Amanda, who would like to know what you're working on next, if you're working on anything next.
Well, right now I'm just kind of like working up on keeping with the book tour and social media, and it's a very busy time, and keeping my kids fed and stuff too. That's also important. I have a couple ideas that I'm developing, and one I have a little bit of an opening to, and I guess I don't mind sharing ideas, at least a hint of ideas, in which with a disclaimer that they may change a lot as time goes on, or get abandoned, as I frequently do with novel attempts. But I've got one about two characters whose lives have kind of fallen apart, and so the boyfriend kind of drags his girlfriend, who's depressed, and he's also depressed, out to the Pacific coast to try and kind of bring some wonder back into her life, and connect with the place where he grew up, and also there's a kind of mystical sea creature, so that brings the speculative aspect in, and then the other one is about a like 1800s composer who is struggling to complete one of his works, and he starts having what may be visions or visitations or madness, and it's harder to tell, but as part of a bigger story that he doesn't understand, and hopefully has some good twists in it.
Okay, so I want to see early drafts when you have them. That's what I want.
It may be a while, but I would love to send some your way.
Well, that's the thing. When people always ask you these questions when you're on tour and you're like, I don't know where my feet are right now, let alone what I'm working on. So I understand that so much. An easier question. What are you reading for fun, if you're able to read for fun right now?
Well, I've had a little less time than usual, but I've been reading some things by other debuting authors that I know, and I've been kind of like booked up with those, but it's also been a great period of reading because all these people who I've met through this process are excellent writers. And so what I'm in the middle of right now is called Self-Portrait with Nothing from Tor Books by a writer, Amy Pawatka, I think is how she pronounces her name. So it's about paintings that interact with other universes, alternate universes. And it's working in a very similar space where it's kind of a personal story tied to the speculative. And I recently read Stephanie Feldman's Saturnalia, which is a really excellent kind of horror, spooky type novel about a night of revelry in like a holiday in Philadelphia that's tied in with the occult. So that was a lot of fun. And then I just picked up last weekend and snuck in the opening section of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. And I can't wait to get the chance to get back to that because it's really good, character-driven, interesting inhabitation of creative people figuring out their vision. And it's with video games, not with like writing or painting or music, but it feels like anybody, but especially people who do creative work, is going to really resonate with it.
Now I have new reads.
Yeah, they're good. I can send you like 50. So.
Yes. I have like 3 pages of questions here, and I could be at this for like 3 years. That's not good. All right. I have to ask about your process for writing this. Like, I have to ask how long it took and like the drafts. I know you went back and added some little drops in as you went revised, but yeah, how did this start? How long did it take?
Well, I first read Equilateral, the Ken Kalfus book, in 2013, I think, when it came out. It was 2013 or 2014. And that gave me the idea for, what if there was a civilization on Mars during that time period, but they wrote back. And then I thought that the interesting take on that is they can write back. They do sometimes, but they're really not that interested in this. My joke summary of the book is that Mars ghosts us because we're not good enough at math. And what I thought was so appealing about that is that you've got a civilization that is so close, pretty much the closest it could be in the universe. And it's just not that interested in us, and how like sad and lonely that would be, which is the direction as a literary writer I always want to go, is like as sad and lonely as possible. But that was just an idea sitting in my idea tracker for a long time. And I felt like I was waiting for the right angle, the other half of it, to click into place. And at some point, just thinking about it in 2019, I kind of realized what the Earthbound story, which was always going to be the foreground, was going to be, that it was going to be these characters trying to measure up to Mars by solving the math. And once I figured that out and things really took off, I was like, okay, where do they need to be figuring this out? What do they have to be trying to do? And I didn't take long to figure out, okay, they need to be on this kind of quest to do that measuring up. And I was able to start figuring out the characters from there and get writing pretty quick. And most of the writing happened really fast. I wrote part 1 in a little over a month, and I wrote part 2 in a little over a month. And then COVID shut down schools, and I didn't get a chance to write much until like the next summer. So it was like a 6-month pause, and I was having trouble figuring out where and how to begin part 3. And so I started up again late that summer and kind of pushed through the tough part and got to the finish in another 5 or 6 weeks. And I did some revisions before starting to send them out to agents, but it wasn't big, exhaustive revisions. And that's similar to my process for writing short stories, which is I do a lot more in the pre-writing stages than shifting things around later. And I get to tie things around together with math again. There was this New Yorker profile a couple months back about this like reclusive, kind of wild mathematician who is this really like interesting mathematician and approached things in a really interesting way. And he talked about how his process was, he said there are 2 ways of opening a nut, that you can like beat it against something until it cracks open, or you can soak the nut in water and the skin just peels off, which I guess is probably true. I've never opened a nut that way, but that feels kind of like my process, where I will sit with an idea a long time and wait for it to ripen, and I'll sit with a scene for a little while and wait for it to ripen, where I've got the core aspects of it figured out and I'm just kind of connecting the dots. And I was doing that with this, but I was kind of doing it fast because like this is exactly what people are always telling writers not to expect, but like the idea took off and kind of kept going and had me very excited to be writing it. And so, you know, I'd get in my pages in the morning or in the evening, usually when the rest of the family was asleep. And I'd go to bed thinking about what's next and kind of figuring out the scene so that I could, you know, let it ripen and get it most of the way ready, and just figuring out the plot line, like having an idea of like what the next 3 things to happen were going to be. So I was really kind of trying to use the time I could be at the computer to write and the time when I couldn't be at the computer, but I had to be doing the dishes or whatever, to kind of figure it out. So I'd say that was like probably one of the places where I figured out most of the book was at the sink.
I think that's not uncommon. There's something about keeping your body busy that lets your mind play.
Yeah.
And I'm also going to tell myself that you thought about this for 8 years before you did anything, because that makes me feel better.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, I wrote part 1 in a month. Oh, you jerk.
It was surprising. I mean, on the other hand, I've got like 80 chapter 1s of various abandoned novel projects that did not take off so easily. I
mean, but they're all building to the one that sticks, right?
Yeah. And I think that was kind of my process in starting to write short stories too, is I was less kind of revising and perfecting my early stories than I was like, okay, this is an attempt. It's kind of a failed draft. I figured out why it won't work. And so I'm going to try something new rather than keep working on that one. So it's more of like an iterative process than kind of focusing on one draft.
So this is kind of a left turn of a question. You wrote genius so well and so in such a textured way that I have to know, do you know any geniuses? Have you interacted with any?
I don't know. I don't know if there are, I don't think I've had any interactions, and I feel like I'm kind of like offhand insulting everyone I know accidentally, but I don't think I've had a brush with like an Einstein. I do know a lot of very smart people through this program I was in college, and it was a sort of college-wide honors program, and it drew in a lot of people from different disciplines. And so I've always liked that, as an undergraduate, I wasn't just around other English majors. I had my classes with them, and I loved interacting with them that way, but I also knew really smart people in the sciences. It's an agricultural university, so in ag, in all sorts of fields. And I knew some of the nerdiest ones of them because I was on the college quiz bowl team, and so that's where the nerds gathered. but I also, I've had the chance to lean on some of them for various writings, and for this one, kind of my core guide was he's in the acknowledgments, a guy named Brian Gleim who teaches physics and teaches astronomy, and so I hit him up with very many questions, and he was very patient, and I'm very, very thankful for his help. And I hope I didn't have too many things in there that are just flat out wrong or impossible, where he gets embarrassed of how I work with his guidance. Yeah.
There are also some added elements in this book as well. So it all kind of back together.
Yeah, I've got my mom's side of the family is in cattle ranching. Am I still coming through?
Yes.
Okay. My mom's side of the family is in cattle ranching, and so I was kind of connected with that. And I think Rick has similar feelings to me there, where like I got some exposure to that, but it wasn't like my day-to-day life. And so like if I'm out on the ranch, there's a little bit of a feeling of like being an imposter there, and Rick gets to react to that by being like a little embarrassed of his higher education and his life as an academic. But I also, that it gave me some people to ask about tractors and crops and different stuff. So a cousin of mine provided some help with that.
I was going to say, it felt very real and, very well thought out. And it, you maybe want to get a van of 5 people and go make a crop circle.
Yeah, it would be
which
fun.
may not have been your intent.
Any farmers. Yeah. Yeah, not specifically, though I think they're kind of fascinating and interesting as kind of almost a kind of folk art. But I don't think I could get anyone to volunteer their corn crops for a crop circle.
Well, I think that brings us full circle. But it's been such a delight talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. It's been great. This is our first time meeting audio visually, and it's perfect. I did have one last quick thing to say. I know we're running low on time, but since we dove right into questions, I didn't get to say just how much I loved and connected with Erika's books. The first one I read was Light from Other Stars, and it was while I was kind of struggling through section 3 a bit. And it's just like, oh, this is what I want to do. This is how I'm trying to make my book be in the world. And so I was nervous but excited to get to send Erika a copy of Singer Distance. She's been such a great champion of it. So I think everyone will love them as much as I do. So you should make sure you include that in your order. Get a copy of Light from Other Stars and get a copy of Book of Speculation, and you'll have a really good month of reading.
That's the power of the internet, where we can connect with wonderful authors and do these things. Like Ethan said, below, you'll take you to our website. You can get not only Singer Distance, but you also can get Book of Speculation and Light from Other Stars. Thank you so much, Ethan, and thank you so much, Erika, for doing this. We really appreciate it, and what a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for hosting us.
Of course, everyone out there, thank you for being here. If you were late, you can watch the replay of this if you're watching this live. We'll also be re-uploading this in about a few days to our YouTube channel, so you can rewatch it there forever. So it's going to live on the internet. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a great night, and we'll see you at the next virtual event or in-store event. Bye.
Bye.